video. There's lots of gold in this thing. I mean, check this out. This is just classic.
And minuscule, they don't take away from the narrative.
Put simply,
And then he just jumps to a debate, and he doesn't even give you Bart Ehrman's side of this. He doesn't give you a link to this debate. You have to manually type it in. See down here?
the best attested work of the ancient world.
So how many people in this video that are watching it do you think actually went and watched the context? And it's so hilarious because this is exactly what the New Testament does. It gives you Paul's epistles, and you only have one side of the phone conversation. Like, hello, Paul, what should we do about this? And then you read, I think it's a shame for men to have long hair. Like, okay, what's the context? What does the Torah say about a man having long hair? That it's not a shame. Hello, Paul. One of our parishioners was caught having sex with his mother-in-law. What? Like, this is a Holy Spirit-filled domination, by the way. They've all been baptized into Jesus.
And precisely because
So let's, and the other thing you notice about this is like, if you actually do manually type this in, there's no context. Like, what portion of the debate is this? So this is another
we trust
2 hours and 10 minutes. What's the
a
context?
number of different themes. It might mean Arthur Kane original text wrote. Or has the text. This is why text historical introduction.
Some people copied the copies of the copies.
And Bart's right. This is why we have so many copies. And some of those copies have errors because there was an original text, and this spiritual movement was popular, so we got a lot of copies of it. But the fact that there are a lot of copies doesn't make what it's saying truth.
And some people copied the copies of the copies of the copies of the copies. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried to write out a copy of one of the books of the New Testament, like the Gospel of Mark, but I can guarantee you, if you do that, you're going to make a mistake.
Absolutely, and I have done this. It's inevitable.
You might make lots of mistakes. And you are much more highly educated and literate than the vast majority of early Christians. Mistakes happen when people copy texts. And the problem is, when somebody copies a text and makes a mistake, the next person who copies the copy replicates the mistakes of his predecessor. And he makes mistakes of his own. And then somebody comes along and copies that copy. And when they copy that copy, they replicate the mistakes of both of their predecessors, and they make their own mistakes. And then somebody copies that copy. And it goes on like that for year after year after year. The only time mistakes get corrected is when a scribe is copying a text and they realize, oh, this copy has a mistake. And they try to correct the mistake. But they don't know what the original said. They're just trying to make it right.
This is precisely it. And, I don't know exactly when he comes in and says
We
this.
have hundreds of thousands of variants
Yes, this is what he just was addressing, right?
and hundreds of early manuscripts. We're in an excellent position for recovering the wording of the original.
But we're not. And this is why half the conversation doesn't make sense. Listen to what Bart says again.
Text and they realize, oh, this copy has a mistake. And they try to correct the mistake. But they don't know what the original said. They're just...
We don't know what the original said. So his argument is invalid that because we have all of these vast numbers of discrepancies in all of these manuscripts, we can get to the original text. No, we can't. But again, it doesn't matter. You look at what we have. Like, let's look at one. Hebrews 10:5. Which is quoting from Psalm 46:8, which most of your modern translations will have these cross references, right? Therefore, when he came into the world, he says, sacrifice and offering you have not desired, but a body you prepared for me. In burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin you have taken no pleasure. Then I said, behold, I have come. In the scroll of the book it is written of me to do your will, O God. Okay, so look at Psalm 40. Like, shouldn't you open up the source text to look at the context to better understand at least what's being said? I mean, to even better understand it. But none of you do this. Sacrifice and meal offering you have not desired. My ears you have opened. My ears. Not preparing a body, preparing our ears to Shema. And this is why it says, burnt offering and sin offering you have not required. Then I said, behold, I come in the scroll of the book, it is written of me. I desire to do your will, O my God. Your law is written in my inner being. And notice he cut that out. And this is what the author's pretext, that a human body is the will of God. And you see this again in the prior chapter, right? When he quotes Leviticus 11. Where was that at? 17:11, sorry. Maybe that is in Hebrews 10 as well. I don't remember. I have to look at the cross reference. Yeah, it's in Hebrews 9. According to the law, one may say almost all things are cleansed with blood. This is not according to the law. It's not what Torah says. And, this is one of those gotcha things, right? According to the law, all things are cleansed with blood, right? And without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. Really? Do I need to remind you of King David? How he had murdered someone, committed adultery, which have no atonement possible, and yet Father forgave him. And even in this psalm, he says, for you do not delight in sacrifice, otherwise I would give it. You are pleased not with burnt offering. And the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit and a broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. Okay. But let's really look at this. Let's say that the author is correct. Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness, right? Shalom, Charles. So look at Leviticus 17:11 again. For life is in the flesh of the blood, and you have given it you on the altar to make atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes atonement by the life. Okay. Is this any blood? Can I go kill an armadillo in my yard and put it on my altar and say, this blood of the armadillo is for the atonement of my sin? I mean, this is ridiculous, but this is what the author of Hebrews is trying to get you to say, to accept human sacrifice. The blood of an armadillo obviously does not atone for sin. It's an abomination. But the blood of a man, the Son of Man, or even the Son of God, does also not atone for sin. It's impossible. Just because the blood is in the life and therefore makes atonement doesn't mean all blood does. It doesn't mean the blood of a man, the Son of Man, the Son of God, can atone for your sin. And this is the problem with his argument. His argument is based on the fallacy of his pretext that the New Testament is truth. And Bart's argument also is flawed because he has become an agnostic. He doesn't believe the Torah. But it's still a valid thing to listen to both sides and not take one side of the debate and use that to bolster your pretext. And this is exactly what Adam did. He took one side of a debate, like you take one side of Paul's one-sided epistles, and then you use a one-sided conversation to create doctrinal truth. How do you not see a problem with this?
Speak about the number of variants without also speaking about the number of manuscripts is an irresponsible appeal to sensationalism.
Why is that irresponsible? It's a valid point. But more valid, like if there were 1 million manuscripts and they all agreed 100%, and this is what you got to understand this, Christians and Messianics, even if these manuscripts had no discrepancies, even if there were 1 billion of them, they all had the same text 100%, would that make it truth? No. See, Torah is the standard of truth. Torah forbids what the New Testament teaches. I give you sound learning. Do not forsake my Torah, which is instruction. You shall not add to the word which I am commanding to you, nor take away from it, that you may keep the commandments of Yahweh your Elohim, which I am commanding you. Torah is the standard of truth. And if anything the New Testament says, no matter how many manuscripts there are, no matter how much in agreement they are, no matter how much you think you can drill into the source of it, if any of that contradicts the Torah, guess what? That's a beautiful image. No one who is emasculated or has his male organ cut off shall enter the assembly of Yahweh. Okay? That's a Torah commandment. For there are eunuchs who are born that way from their mother's womb, and there are eunuchs who are made that eunuchs by men, and there are also eunuchs who made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Torah doesn't command you to make yourself a eunuch for the kingdom of heaven. He who is able to accept it, let him accept it. But this is a direct contradiction of Torah. It doesn't matter how much agreement there is. It doesn't matter how many manuscripts there are. Let's take another one from John. You know, one of their favorites, and they love to say, this is allegory. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him. It doesn't matter how much agreement it does, and it also doesn't matter, like you try to allegorize this, right? Because, you know it's evil to drink blood. This is why you go to this argument of allegory. If it's evil, it's evil. There's no making evil good. Any person who eats any blood, even that person will be cut off from his people. So, you're drinking grape juice and you call it blood. Is this okay? No. When David, he was so thirsty that he wanted the water from Bethel, he sent his men to get it. They brought the water back. David dumped it out because to God, it was equivalent to drinking blood. I mean, do you realize how serious this is? You've taken what is evil and you call it good. It doesn't matter that there are a zillion manuscripts all in agreement. You've followed writings that contradict and violate Torah. Yah is awesome. Yasam. Thank you, Charles.
Now we get to the second section, the nature of the variants. What kinds of variants are there in the manuscripts? Well, more than 99% make virtually no difference at all.
Okay, that's awesome. That means that they are 99% in agreement with violating Torah.
For example, the most common variant involves spelling. And this is... Sorry about that.
The entire story is still preserved. It's still there. I would believe it is the word of Elohim.
You would? Did Elohim change? I mean, for I, Yahweh, do not change, therefore you sons of Jacob are not consumed. I guess that's wrong. He changed, and suddenly an innocent man can be murdered for the sins of the world. He can command you to drink blood.
It is the truth, right? Another person that I would recommend everybody searching out is Lee Strobel.
Oh, yes, Lee Strobel. He supposedly was an atheist, and then his wife converted to Christianity, and then he became a Christian. But, look at this. Look at the deep studies that Father has led me to. If he studied the word of Yah instead of the words of men, what would happen? He would come to the same conclusion we have, that Yah did not tell you to put your faith in the Son of Man who was murdered for the transgression of your sin. He told you what? Seek Yahweh while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts, and let them return to Yahweh. There's no Yeshua. It doesn't tell you, put your faith in the Son of Man who died for your sin, and you may or may not forsake your wicked ways. That doesn't really matter. Just put your faith and trust in this agreement of human sacrifice, and then perform theophagy. It doesn't say that.
An atheist turned Christian who's an author and former investigative journalist. So similar to James,
Critical thinker.
Yeah.
Oh, a critical thinker. Not too critical, actually, if he accepted the New Testament arguments. I mean, let's take another one. This is my favorite, Romans 10:6. But the righteousness of faith speaks in this way. Do you not say in your heart, who will look up to heaven? That is to bring Christ down. Okay, open up the scripture and compare it. Did Paul quote this correctly? For this commandment which I am commanding you today is not too difficult for you, nor is it too far from you. It is not in heaven that you should say, who will go up to heaven for us and get it for us to make us hear it, that we may do it. No. I mean, if Paul is right, then what the author of Deuteronomy is saying, Moses, speaking for Yahweh, is that we don't need this man to come down to teach us to do it.
Similar to James Wallace, he was a legal editor for the Chicago Tribune, who after investigating...
Yeah, J. Warner Wallace is another one that, he calls cold case Christianity, right? That, they disagree, so it's okay. And I went over this in my sheet that I shared in the other video yesterday, that, their disagreements are not valid at all. I mean, if this was actually in a court case, and the court heard all 4 testimonies of the resurrection, you know what they would say? You're all lying. You're all lying. And there's nothing in common. Nothing. Like, I don't understand how you Christians, you don't see this. Like, there's nothing in common. And when Matthew does agree with Mark, it's blatant plagiarism. And it's not just like a different witness, it's blatant plagiarism. He was a copyist who added to the story.
Deeply questioned the validity of the Gospels as well as the credibility of the Bible, and came to the conclusion that Yeshua is the Messiah.
Okay, well, let's say that this is so important to understand. Let's say that that was his conclusion. Does his conclusion, being a rational man, does that make it true? And this is like so crucial. If a prophet or dreamer of a dream rises among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or the wonder comes true concerning which he spoke, saying, let us walk after other Elohim, whom you have not known, and let us serve them. And you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams. For Yahweh your God is testing you. So even if he is like the most brilliant man alive, if he comes out and says, yes, you should follow him, no, you shouldn't. You have to test it yourself.
The Son of Yah as laid out in the scriptures.
The Son of Yah as laid out in scriptures. I know I really hammered home on this yesterday. The Son of Yah is Israel. Thus you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says Yahweh, Israel is my son, my firstborn. So what scriptures is he talking about? I mean, how many of them actually read the whole thing?
And I think he would definitely say that the variations and all the manuscripts that we have.
It's interesting that this is even an argument. Like, why are the variations even an argument? It's the fact that it contradicts Torah.
All the differing little facts here and there, even the little nuances that might be different, are actual proof that
No, no. Okay, so let's make an argument. Let's say that the picture painted by the four witnesses of the resurrection actually painted a picture that they actually saw the same event, because clearly they didn't. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist or a criminal investigator to figure this out. They did not see the same event. Nothing is in common. Nothing. I mean, Matthew, let's go through this. Like Matthew 28. We have Mary, which is the one thing in common with all of them, that the woman, for some reason, goes to visit the grave. And I don't recommend listening to Tovia, but he says something brilliant here. There's no reason a woman would visit a man's grave, because she would see his shame. They're buried naked. And then we have the earthquake, which is not in any of the other gospels. I mean, something like an earthquake, they just forget to mention the quakes and the fears. And then it says, "Do not be afraid that he is risen." This is basically a verbatim mark. And then we have the additional testimony added that, they go out to, where was that at? To the brothers leave to Galilee, right? So they're in Galilee, and this is where they hear the Great Commission. So let's go to Mark, because Mark actually ends at Mark 16:8. And they went out and fled from the tomb in trembling and astonishment. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. And that's the end. Everything else was added in the 3rd century. Okay, Luke. So we again have the woman at the tomb, right? But there's no earthquake, there's no lightning. And then we have an additional story here that Peter went into the tomb. And he saw the linen wrappings only, and he went away marveling at what had happened. Okay. That probably was the end of the story, right? But then we have an additional story that's not in any of the other witnesses. I mean, imagine being in court and you hear the story of Mary and like, this is a little weird. Like, why would Mary be going to the tomb? And they didn't really see anything in any of the synoptics. Only in John's gospel do we get the gardener, who is J-Man. The rest of the story doesn't have that. They marveled at what happened. So then we have the witness of Luke come up and say, he also was on the road to Emmaus. Emmaus? Like, why Emmaus? Emmaus is here, and Galilee is over here. I mean, if he's telling them to go to Galilee, why are they going to Emmaus? It doesn't make any sense. And the other weird thing in this, and that's a consistency, is these were men that were with him for 3 years, and they didn't recognize him? They didn't recognize him? So then we have his next witness, right? Now, while they were telling these things, he stood in the midst and said, "Peace to you." Stood in the midst. So, like, he just suddenly appeared in the middle of them? I mean, is this really resurrection, guys and gals, brothers and sisters? Did he really get resurrected? Or are we seeing the evidence of something else, like divination? Being startled and frightened, they were thinking that they were seeing a spirit. Isn't that interesting? Why would they think that? Why would they say this? Why would he record that it's not actually a resurrected being? And this is why John adds Thomas, or some redactor, because I don't think that was even in the original story either, that he stuck his hand in his side of the nude resurrected man. Why are you troubled, right? See my hands and feet. Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones. And it said this, he showed them his hands and feet. but not his side, because only John had him pierced. That it wasn't in the synoptics. And while they were still not believing because of their joy, he said to them, "Have you eaten anything?" And he eats, which, again, he doesn't do in any of the other witnesses. You see, this is the problem with J. Warner Wallace. It's like, well, it's normal for witnesses to disagree. Disagree? They don't agree on anything. It's like they're not even in the same town. And then he led them as far out as Bethany, and lifting up his hands, he blessed them. And it was happening while he was blessing them, he parted the ways and carried them up to heaven. Then they returned to Jerusalem, which doesn't happen in any of the other Gospels. So let's go to Acts, because, Acts, I believe, it doesn't really say where they were at. It doesn't say they were in Bethany, though. So let's go to John, because John is really fascinating with, John 19, maybe it's first chapter 20, actually. Yeah. So now we have the empty tomb, which, you have Mary going, but she's not carrying spices because Nicodemus did that. But it still doesn't make sense for her to go, as Tovia said. Then they stop, and she saw the linen wrappings lying there, but did not go in. And Simon Peter came also, which is the same story as Luke, which you see this progression of things added in the later writings. Saw the linen wrappings lying there, and the face cloth which had been there, not lying with the face linings, but folded up in place. So the other disciple who had first come to the tomb and also entered also saw and believed. For just as they did not understand the scripture, saying he must rise again. So the disciples went away and to where they were staying. So, okay, that's an interesting, right? But then why all of a sudden does it go back to this conversation about Mary? I mean, the whole beginning story, this is a whole encapsulation. This is like what we see in Mark. So probably the earliest version of John ended at John 20:10. But then we have this additional conversations added. This was added first, Mary standing outside the tomb crying. But why? When it says they went away, why would she stay there? This doesn't make any sense. It saw two angels in white sitting, one at the head and one at the feet. Well, why didn't Peter see that? Do you guys even reason this together? And so Jesus is standing there as a gardener, and she sees him and says, Mary said to him in Hebrew, Rabboni, which means teacher. And Jesus said, stop clinging to me, which means don't touch me. Don't touch me. And look at the Greek, right? Said to her, stop cleaning, apto. Apto means what? To fasten, to adhere, to kindle, set a fire. It's like she was touching him. And he said, don't touch me. I haven't yet ascended to the Father. Okay, so likely this is another ending. And then we hear this additional story. And why is this one added? Because there were people in the 2nd century reading the Gospel of Thomas that the official church did not like. So they added a story about Thomas being humbled and doing what? Bring your finger here and see my hands, and bring your hand here and put it into my side. And this is all Gnostic, putting your hand into his side. And do not be unbelieving, but believing. And Thomas answered, my Lord and my God. And the Trinitarians, they love that passage. But why would he suddenly contradict himself if this is a true story? Mary can't touch him, but Thomas can. Is a woman unclean, but a man's clean enough and purified enough that he can touch him, not only touch him, but put his hand into his side? I mean, this is so sick. Like, put your hand into my side. Oh, God, why did I believe that? And again, we see an ending. Why was this gospel written? Therefore, many other signs he did, and also presents to the disciples, which are not written in this book. This is clearly an ending. Clearly. This was clearly the end of the book. But then we get a whole nother chapter of him appearing in Galilee, which matches Matthew, but he never was in Galilee in Mark and Luke. Then he's telling Peter what? And this is important too, and this is something that, as a Christian and Messianic, you don't get because you don't understand the prophets and the Torah. He's telling him to tend his lambs. Why is that important? He's anointing Peter as Messiah. And this is from the Romans who want Peter as the head of their church. This is another 2nd century edition.
There's humans behind this writing it, that it's not just some person behind a desk writing all this out as just making thousands of copies. It's not coming from one source. This is coming from many different kinds of people. And so I think that shows a lot of evidence right there.
I do too.
Notice they don't say evidence for truth, but evidence. Yes, it is evidence that there were people that believed this in the 1st century. Absolutely. But is it evidence, number one, that this man was resurrected, that this is Yah would use human sacrifice and Yah would command theophagi? No, it's not evidence for any of that. It is evidence that there were a group of believers in the 2nd and 3rd century that were making lots of copies of these writings.
Can you help me prove the existence of Jesus Christ?
Absolutely. Beyond any.
And that's from the movie. We'll have to pick this up later. Shalom.